400 million years ago, the tallest thing on land wasn't a tree. It was a mushroom, and it stood 8 meters tall. That's almost 30 feet, taller than a 2-story building. The time Earth was ruled by 30-foot mushrooms sounds like science fiction, but fossil evidence from every continent proves these organisms dominated the planet for 40 million years, before forests existed, before dinosaurs. Before anything with a backbone crawled onto land, giant fungal towers stood across the Earth like biological skyscrapers in a world that had nothing else tall. These weren't the mushrooms you find in your backyard. They were towering biological pillars called Prototaxites, and scientists spent 150 years arguing about what they actually were. Some said giant algae, others said ancient trees. A few suggested lichens. Nobody could agree because nothing alive today looks anything like them. To understand why giant fungi ruled the Earth, you need to picture the Devonian period, around 420 million years ago. The continents looked nothing like today. Gondwana dominated the southern hemisphere. Laurentia sat near the equator. Most life still lived in the oceans. Fish had just evolved jaws. And land? Land was basically a desert with some green patches near water. The tallest plants back then were primitive stems called Cooksonia. They reached maybe 6 centimeters, that's about 2 inches, smaller than your finger. These were the giants of the plant world. Moss-like organisms formed low carpets on damp ground. Nothing could grow tall because nothing had evolved the internal plumbing to move water upward against gravity. Then there was Prototaxites. Standing 8 meters tall, up to 1 meter wide at the base. Some specimens reached nearly 9 meters, towering over everything else like a telephone pole in a field of grass. If you stood next to one, you'd have to crane your neck just to see the top. Not to worry though, it gets stranger. When you cut open a Prototaxites fossil, you don't find wood. You don't find plant cells. You don't find anything that looks like tree anatomy. Instead, you find millions of tiny interwoven tubes. Each tube measures about 50 micrometers across. That's thinner than a human hair, half the width of a grain of sand. These tubes weave around each other like a massive rope, like someone twisted millions of microscopic strands into a single trunk that could support its own weight for decades. The tubes come in 2 types: skeletal tubes with thick walls that provide structure, and thinner generative filaments that branch frequently and form the organism's living matrix. This architecture is completely unique. No plant has ever built itself this way. No algae. Nothing. When scientists first discovered these fossils in 1843, they had no idea what they were looking at. The Canadian geologist John William Dawson found the first specimen. He thought they were rotting conifer trees, ancient wood that had been colonized by fungus over time. He named them Prototaxites, meaning first you. He assumed they represented the dawn of the conifer family. He was completely wrong, but it took 150 years for anyone to prove it. In case you needed more proof that these organisms were bizarre, consider the scientific debate. For over a century, researchers argued whether Prototaxites was a giant algae, a lichen, a fungus, or something else entirely. The problem was simple. Nothing alive today looks anything like it. Every time someone proposed an answer, someone else found a reason it couldn't be right. A 20-foot tall lichen? Lichens don't grow that big. Giant marine algae? The fossils clearly came from land. An early tree? The internal structure showed no plant cells whatsoever. As geophysicist Kevin Boyce from the University of Chicago put it, a 20-foot tall fungus doesn't make any sense. Neither does a 20-foot tall algae. But here's the fossil. Then in 2007, Boyce and his team finally cracked it. They analyzed the carbon isotopes inside Prototaxites fossils from multiple locations around the world. Here's why that matters. Plants get their carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. They breathe in carbon dioxide, strip out the carbon, and build their bodies from it. So all plants from the same time period and location should have similar carbon isotope signatures. Prototaxites didn't match. The carbon ratios varied wildly from specimen to specimen, even from the same location and time period. This meant it wasn't making its own food like plants do. It was consuming other organisms, decaying matter, dead plant material, whatever it could absorb from the soil around it. That's fungal behavior. Prototaxites was almost certainly some kind of giant fungus, the fruiting body of an organism that fed on the dead and dying things around it. But here's what makes it worse. A 2025 study from the University of Edinburgh analyzed Prototaxites more closely than ever before. Researchers examined fossils preserved in the Rhynie chert in Scotland. This deposit contains some of the best preserved early land organisms ever found. Individual cells are visible. Internal structures remain intact after 400 million years, And what they found changed everything. The internal structure of Prototaxites didn't match any known fungus. The tubes branched and reconnected in ways never seen in any living organism. They formed patterns that don't exist anywhere else in nature. And when researchers tested for chitin, the building block that all fungi share, the molecule that defines the fungal kingdom, they couldn't find it. Instead, they found chemical signatures similar to lignin, which is found in plant wood. The researchers concluded that Prototaxites might not be a fungus at all. It might represent an entirely extinct kingdom of life, a branch of the tree of life that has no living descendants, no relatives, nothing that survived to the modern day. Talk about rewriting the textbooks. So what did these giants actually do? Why did they grow so massive when nothing else could? Scientists believe the visible trunk was just the fruiting body, like the mushroom you see above ground is just a small part of the organism. The real body lives underground. Below the surface of a modern forest, fungal mycelium networks can spread for miles. The largest organism on Earth today is a honey fungus in Oregon, whose underground network covers nearly 4 square miles. Prototaxites likely work the same way. A vast network of filaments spread through the soil, absorbing nutrients from decaying matter, breaking down dead plants and organic material. Then it channeled all those resources upward into the towering trunk we see fossilized. The trunk itself likely released spores, reproductive particles that could drift on the wind and start new colonies. Being 8 meters tall gave Prototaxites a massive advantage. Wind could carry those spores across the barren landscape for miles. The height wasn't just impressive, it was functional. It was the key to spreading across an entire planet. And Prototaxites had no competition whatsoever. Trees didn't exist yet. The tallest plants barely reached your ankle. There was nothing to block the wind, nothing to shade the ground, nothing to compete for sunlight because these organisms probably didn't need sunlight at all. These fungal towers had the entire terrestrial ecosystem to themselves. Unfortunately for everything else trying to survive on land, Prototaxites dominated for 40 million years, from the late Silurian through the Devonian period. To put that in perspective, modern humans have existed for about 200,000 years. Prototaxites lasted 200 times longer. You couldn't walk across any continent without encountering these towers. Fossils have been found in what are now North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, and even Saudi Arabia. Wherever early land ecosystems existed, Prototaxites was there, silent, massive, absorbing nutrients from whatever died around it, releasing spores into the prehistoric wind. Shockingly, we've found evidence that early land animals interacted with these giants. Some Prototaxites fossils show tube-like boreholes running through the tissue. Something was burrowing into them. Early arthropods, likely primitive insects or their relatives, were drilling into these fungal towers, perhaps feeding on the tissue, perhaps using them as shelter. This is particularly fascinating because these boreholes appeared millions of years before plants developed woody stems. The insects learned to bore into Prototaxites first. Then when trees finally evolved wood, they transferred that behavior. The first wood-boring insects practiced on giant mushrooms. So why did Prototaxites disappear? The same thing that ends many ancient dynasties. Competition from something better adapted. Around 370 million years ago, vascular plants finally figured out how to grow tall. They evolved lignin, the molecule that makes wood strong. They developed root systems that could anchor large structures. They created leaves that could capture sunlight efficiently. Real trees emerged. Archaeopteris, one of the first true trees, could reach 30 meters. That's almost 4 times the height of the largest Prototaxites. And these trees could grow fast. In years, not decades. Prototaxites, for all its size, grew slowly. Scientists examining growth rings in the fossils estimate it added layers over many years, maybe decades, to reach full height. It couldn't compete with organisms that could achieve the same height in a fraction of the time. And as forests spread, they changed the entire environment. More shade blocked spore dispersal. Leaf litter altered soil chemistry. Root systems competed for the same nutrients Prototaxites needed. The world that these fungal towers had dominated simply stopped existing. It was replaced by something new, something that would eventually cover the continents in green. By the late Devonian, Prototaxites was gone. No descendants, no relatives, no living legacy except fossils scattered across the world, waiting to confuse scientists for the next 400 million years. Surprisingly, fungal giants didn't disappear entirely from Earth. They just changed strategy. Today, the largest organism on the planet is still a fungus, it's just not visible. In the Blue Mountains of Oregon, there's a honey fungus called Armillaria ostoi. Its underground mycelium network spans nearly 4 square miles. That's over 2,300 acres. It's estimated to be between 2,400 and 8,650 years old. Some researchers think it could weigh as much as 6,000 tons. The difference is that modern fungi stay hidden. They learned, evolutionarily speaking, that growing underground protects them from fire, drought, and competition from trees. Prototaxites grew up. Modern giants grow out. Same strategy of massive size, different execution. What makes Prototaxites so remarkable isn't just its size, it's what it represents. A time when the rules of life on land hadn't been written yet, when a fungus, or whatever it actually was, could be the tallest thing on the planet, because nothing else knew how to grow tall. For 40 million years, these 8-meter towers stood across every continent. They watched as the first insects crawled onto land, as the first amphibians dragged themselves out of the water, as the first primitive forests began to take root around their bases. And then they were gone, outcompeted by the very trees we take for granted today, replaced by organisms that could do the same job faster and more efficiently. That's the reality of 420 million years ago, when giant fungi ruled the earth, when mushrooms were the skyscrapers of the ancient world, and when the tallest thing you could see on any horizon wasn't made of wood, it was made of something that science still can't fully explain.